Hello and welcome back to our master course on strategy. I'm Professor Kai Reinhardt, and today we are embarking into our next journey as we delve into the environmental threats model. In this episode, we'll demystify 5 critical environmental threats that can impact any industry. We'll explore each one in detail, identifying key indicators that could either boost or diminish attractiveness of a certain industry. So let's get started. Remember, when conducting an industry analysis, the vantage point is always the focal firm. That is, firm that we are either studying or working for, consulting, etc. Let's consider this circle graph. Our focal firm is located at the center. From the external space, we see arrows converging towards the center. These arrows symbolize the various threats exerting influence on our firm. Here are the threats, or let's say scenarios in detail. From one arrow, we recognize the threat of new entrants. New players in the market could introduce innovative tactics or products, destabilizing the prevailing norms within this industry, right? From another point, the threat emanates from rivalry among the already established market entities. This competition could trigger aggressive pricing strategies, marketing blitzes, or product advancements. So the third threat comes from superior or cheaper substitutes. Such alternatives can draw away customers or redefine market dynamics. The fourth threat introduces the threat from supplier power. When suppliers wield significant influence, they can negotiate higher prices or determine terms by affecting the firm's profitability. And final threat brings threat from buying power into focus. This empowers buyers to demand price reduction or superior quality or additional services, which takes some pressure on our firm's resources. These are the 5 environmental threats surrounding our focal firm, each dictating the industry's attractiveness and guiding the strategic direction of the firm. Please bear in mind that these threats are not limited by a geographical boundary. In our global and interconnected world, these threats pervade local and global markets alike. For instance, a comprehensive analysis of the smartphone industry, for example, must consider the impact global players and factors such as China's production capabilities or implications for European privacy regulation. Key aim of this model is hence to identify market imperfections that a firm could potentially exploit. And here's the point. An industry offering such opportunities, some imperfections, is viewed as an attractive industry. On the other hand, an industry that closely resembles perfect competition, where every participant has equal access and opportunity, may be perceived as less appealing from a strategy standpoint, right? This may sound a bit strange, but it's just one of the interesting puzzles we encounter in the study of strategic management. Here's where things get really counterintuitive. The attractiveness of an industry in this model is determined by the existence of market imperfections. If an industry has imperfections that can be exploited by a firm, it's considered attractive. In contrast, if an industry is closer to being perfectly competitive with few or no market imperfections, it's deemed unattractive. So this perspective turns our conventional wisdom about perfect competition on its head. While the ideal scenario in economic models is perfect competition for the greatest good of society, the truth is that for businesses, perfect competition might not be so perfect. Why? Because in a perfectly competitive market, it's hard for your business to stand out and make bigger profits. So understanding and strategically responding to these environmental threats is key to gaining and maintaining a competitive advantage in the face of change and uncertainty. Let's have a closer look at the first threat from new competition. When an industry has higher than average profits, it's natural that this industry attracts firms from outside. They are looking to earn similar profits. However, if new firms can enter the industry easily, these higher profits might vanish due to increased competition. Therefore, industry with high threat of new competition is typically unattractive as profits are hard to maintain. Barriers to entry, however, can help firms to create cost disadvantages for new entrants, preserving profits. Interestingly, even import policies, which can impose higher costs on foreign firms wanting to enter a country, make an industry more attractive by erecting barriers. Higher profits can then be expected for those firms who are able to overcome these barriers and enter. So here comes the question: what creates these cost advantages or entry barrier? There are 4 key barriers we know by today. Firstly, one key barrier is the economies of scale. This barrier comes into play when the minimum efficient scale of production is so high that firms not already in the industry cannot afford plant size needed to enter. It might require a large scale operation to be efficient in the industry. This scale is beyond what new firms can manage. They choose not to enter. The next barrier to entry is product differentiation. This barrier exists when customers can recognize difference between products and prefer one product over the other. New entrants would have to innovate and convince customers to try their product, which adds extra cost. Further, incumbent firms might enjoy cost advantages over potential entry. Existing firms might have cost advantages like better suppliers or supplier relationship, exclusive technologies, strategic location, etc., etc. New firms seeing these advantages might decide against entry. So, and the last one are governmental regulation. They also can act as a barrier. Sometimes the government might regulate an industry to such an extent that it's just too costly or impossible for new firms to enter. They might prevent foreign firms from investing in certain industries or raise costs entry so high that it becomes difficult for these firms to compete. Governments can use tools such as tariffs, quotas, and non-tariff trade barriers to impose these barriers to entry. Let's delve a bit deeper into the relationship between economies of scale and the costs of production. As you see on the slide, we have downward sloping curve. This curve signifies that as the scale of production increases, costs of production per unit decrease. This phenomenon is known as economies of scale. Now, how does this translate into real-world business decisions? Essentially, economies of scale act as a major barrier to new entrants in a certain industry. If existing firms have reached a significant scale, they enjoy a lower cost production per unit. This advantage can be quite difficult for new entrants to match, especially if they start with a smaller scale. They would likely face higher costs per unit, making it really harder for them to compete on price. Moreover, this consideration is not just limited to domestic operations, but it's also important when we think of international scenario. For example, a large multinational firm can leverage economies of scale, a global scale, creating a significant barrier for firms wanting to compete in multiple markets. Thus, industries with high economies of scale applying high barriers to entry are often more attractive for existing firms or those planning to enter with substantial resources. On the contrary, industries that are easy to enter, where economies of scale are minimal, might lead to high competition and reduced profitability. So we would generally prefer to be in an industry where these barriers to entry are high. Now let's turn our attention to another environmental threat from existing competitors. This threat essentially measures the intensity of competition within an industry, and it influences an industry's attractiveness as well. Let's have a look at the most common scenario. The first scenario is when there is a large number of competitors of roughly the same size. When there are competitors without a clear leader, companies are less likely to coordinate their action, leading to a very intense competition. For instance, in the laptop industry, many firms are continuously cutting prices to compete with each other, making the market extremely competitive. The second scenario is slow or declining industry. In such a scenario, only way to gain new customers is by taking them from other competitors. The cell phone market is a very good example for it. Initially, the market growth came from first-time cell phone users. Over time, as the market matured, companies had to shed customers away from their rival, right? And now let's have a look at the third scenario, the lack of product differentiation. So when products and services are similar, price becomes the primary basis of competition. This scenario often leads to price wars and reduces profitability. We see this in various food items such as butter, milk, rice, where branding has not created significant product differentiation and competition is primarily based on price. And the last one is the scenario where capacity added in large increments. In industry where capacity is added in large amounts, any new entrant or expansion can lead to an oversupply. This oversupply puts downward pressures on prices as companies scramble to sell their products. The rivalry between, for example, aircraft manufacturers like Boeing or Airbus illustrates exactly this scenario. So finally, we need to understand that industry conditions play a significant role in determining the level of rivalry. By understanding these industry characteristics, we can better anticipate the level of competition we are likely to face in a given industry. Let's have a look at a real-world example. In the world of business, rivals are companies usually that compete to serve the same consumer needs in the same manner, right? So consider the cola market, for instance. Here, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are great examples of rivals. They're both trying to raise customers' interest for carbonated, cola-flavored beverage. They engaged in an intense battle to gain market share using strategies such as advertising, product differentiation, or competitive pricing. Their rivalry is a demonstration of the dynamics we encounter when dealing with existing competition within an industry. This kind of rivalry can have implications on huge market trends, product prices, or the overall attractiveness of an industry. So, on the other hand, there are substitutes. So, as the name suggests, a substitute offer an alternative way to fulfill the same consumer need. Take a look at this kind of, at first glance, it might not seem like it's the same league as Coca-Cola or Pepsi. After all, milk isn't cola, right? However, from a consumer's perspective, both milk and cola can serve the same purpose. They provide beverage to drink. So in the context, milk can be seen as a potential substitute, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, even though its different type of product satisfies the same basic need to quench thirst, right? So consequently, it puts a cap on how much Coca-Cola and Pepsi can charge for their drinks. If they charge too much, consumers might switch to drinking milk instead. This is a key example of how substitute products can impact an industry and why it's crucial for businesses to keep an eye out for potential substitutes that could influence their market. Let's have a look at a second example from the automotive industry. So here we see Ford, GM, Honda, Toyota, VW, Nissan, and so on. All rivals in the same industry. They all compete in the same space by producing small, efficient cars. All attempt to fulfill the same need, providing a car for transportation in the same manner, right? So however, public transportation systems such as buses, trains, or subways represent substitutes for these cars. They meet the same basic need, moving from one place to the other, but in different way. Instead of driving your own car, you can now take a bus or a train. The presence of these substitutes puts a limit on the prices that car manufacturers can charge. If the cost of operating a car becomes too high, consumers might switch to using public transportation instead. In a competitive industry like automobile, the rivalry is very intense. Companies are always trying to outdo each other, either by lowering prices, improving features, or ramping up marketing. If all of this can eat up profits and make the industry less attractive. Hence, understanding the nature and intensity of both rivalry and potential substitutes is crucial for strategic planning. Helps firms navigate their industry landscape more effectively and make better business decisions. Another threat coming from outside is the so-called supplier leverage. Let's dive deeper. Imagine a scenario where a few suppliers dominate an industry. They don't have to compete on prices and thus they can demand higher prices. This lack of price competition is one factor contributing to supplier leverage. Secondly, suppliers who offer unique or highly differentiated products gain a significant advantage. Since these products cannot easily be replaced, these suppliers can maintain higher prices. And thirdly, when there's no close substitute for a supplier's product, the supplier has the freedom to set the prices as they wish. Shifting focus from suppliers to buyers, we now face another significant threat: buyer power. Powerful buyers, just like powerful suppliers, can significantly influence a firm's profitability. Let's break down the factors that increase buyer power. Firstly, when there are only a few buyers for your product, each buyer gains significant bargaining power, right? They can pit sellers against each other, forcing you to compete on more favorable terms for them. Second, if your product is standard or undifferentiated, buyers don't have a specific preference for one supplier over another. This leads to price competition among sellers and could potentially shrink your profit margin. Thirdly, if the product you offer is critical or costly for the buyer, they'll pay extra attention to negotiations, striving to secure the lowest possible price. Consider buyers operating in a highly competitive. Since these buyers typically have razor-thin profit margins, they'll be hard-pressed to manage costs, refusing to pay more than the competitive price for your product. Lastly, if the buyers can realistically threaten to enter your industry, threat backward vertical integration, their bargaining power. Okay, as we conclude our exploration of the environmental threats model today, it's imperative to remember the foundations of this framework. Initially intended to assist policymakers in ensuring competitive markets, Porter's 5 forces, as it is commonly known, embodies economic logic at its core. These threats, which include the potential for new entrants, rivalry among current competitors, supplier power, buyer power, and the threat from substitutes, are the elements that inject competitiveness into the market. In an industry where these threats are high, we can anticipate normal economic growth. However, from a strategic standpoint, the model also equips firms to identify if above average profits are achievable or not. In scenarios where one or more of these threats are somewhat mitigated, we see an increased potential for higher profits.